Imagine turning up at 19 years of age to a Formula One grid that still had Alan Jones, Nelson Piquet, and Gilles Villeneuve in full flight, then being told mid-chaos to hand your car to a teammate and vanish from the timing screens. That's not a rejected Netflix pitch. That was Mike Thackwell's Sunday in Montreal, 1980. And in a way, it's the perfect cold open for a career that was brilliant, baffling, and depending upon who you ask, tragically underwritten or gloriously uncompromised. You're watching the Racing Chronicles. Today, the prodigy who went from teenage phenomenon to motorsport's ultimate what if, and by choice. Mike Thackwell was born in New Zealand in 1961. When he was 6, the family moved to Perth, Western Australia, and that's where the story really ignites. Motocross as a kid, state karting titles at 14, 2 wins at the Hong Kong Kart Grand Prix in 75 and 76, and then a jump to the UK to chase the single-seater ladder. By 79 he was 18, and in British Formula 3 with a Works March Toyota 793. Against a field that included Chico Serra, Andrea Teixeiras, Stefan Johansson, and a young Nigel Mansell, Thackwell won 5 races and finished 3rd in the championship. Seriously heady stuff for a teenager new to Europe. Formula 2 beckoned in 1980, but so did the first brush with Formula 1. At Zandvoort, Tyrrell allowed him to try an Arrows A3 as stand-in. He missed the cut, but his pace was eye-catching for someone hopping into an unfamiliar car. Then came Montreal. Tyrrell entered a third 010 for Thackwell. The start exploded into mayhem. The race was red-flagged, and because both Tyrrells were wrecked, team boss Karen Tyrrell told the 19-year-old to vacate his under-damaged car so Jean-Pierre Jarier could restart. That's why you'll see 2 different versions of the record. Stum still lists him as the youngest F1 starter in history at 19 years and 182 days, but the official logic of avoided start means the youngest starter at the time baton was still credited to Ricardo Rodriguez. These were later broken by Hami Alguersuari and then Max Verstappen. The point isn't the statistic, it's the snapshot. A teenager good enough to be there, erased by circumstance. A year later came the crash that would shadow everything. Testing works rolled Honda at Thruxton in 1981. Thackwell hit the bank head-on. Autosport reported the car stopped from 140 miles an hour to 0 in under 2 feet. He shattered a heel, suffered head injuries, and still hobbled back to finish the season 6th in the F2 Championship. File that under ridiculous toughness. And yet talent finds daylight. Back with Rolton at 1983, he pushed Jonathan Palmer all season and finished runner-up in European F2. In 84, he dominated the final year of that championship. 7 wins from 11, 6 poles, 9 fastest laps, and a thumping 408 laps led. It wasn't a purple patch, it was daylight between him and everyone else. There are a lot of opinions about what Thackwell was like behind the wheel. Here's a clean one from someone who raced and toured alongside him. James Weaver, a future Le Mans racer, put it like this. Boy, could he drive. Mike was a real artist, an absolute genius behind the wheel. Meanwhile, the F1 thread flickered. In 84, he returned to the World Championship with Ram at the Canadian Grand Prix, starting the race but retiring with mechanical trouble. And later had a non-qualifying attempt with Tyrrell in Germany. That year, he even sampled American open-wheel racing with Team Penske, deputising for the injured Rick Mears in 2 kart rounds. It was the sort of patchwork that can either launch a career or leave you stranded between platforms. In F2, 1984 was a coronation. In 1985 was the reboot. Formula 3000 replaced F2 as the last step to F1. Thackwell, now a known quantity, fought all year, won races, and took the title fight to the finale. A clash with Emmanuel Pirot in the last round helped tip the championship to Christian Danner, leaving Thackwell runner-up. Even so, the pattern was loud. Put Mike in equal kit, and he'd be at the front. 1986 might be the most complete one sheet of what he could do everywhere. In single-seaters, he won the Power Grand Prix, a real driver's circuit that flatters no one, only bullies, beating Pirot in a street fighting 73-lap run. And in sports cars, he partnered Henri Pescarolo to win the 1,000 kilometres of the Nürburgring in the Sauber Mercedes C8, the very first World Championship victory for the Sauber Mercedes project. That's not trivia, it's a historical flag planted by a driver some call a cult figure, rather than a headline act. Let's zoom back to the mythology, because this is where the stories about Thackwell get mangled on forums and in well-meaning blogs. No, he didn't win the 1984 Macau Grand Prix. He finished third in a stack field behind John Nielsen and Stefan Johansson. The first year the race was run to F3 rules. Third at Macau says plenty, but accuracy matters. And what about the "he tested for McLaren and matched Prost and Lauda" anecdote you sometimes hear over a beer? You'll struggle to find a reliable contemporary source for that claim. But what is documented is that he tested for the top teams. He had a formal test with Williams in this era, and that Tyrrell valued him enough to keep pulling him into the frame. The broader point stands without embellishment. The right people rated him. The right seat never properly came. So why didn't it happen? Motorsport loves to reverse engineer destiny. If only that sponsor, if only that manager, and there's some of that in Thackwell's story. What Ron Touranak, the Rolt boss whose cars carried him to the F2 heights, offered a measure to take later on. Mike had huge natural talent and could have gone a lot further as a driver. He just needed a bit more management. That's not a eulogy, that's an engineer's diagnosis. But another thread runs through the first-hand recollections. He simply didn't love the corporate theatre that modern top-level racing increasingly demanded. Weaver again tells a story about Thackwell refusing to race a car in perfume-branded colours unless they paint it silver, because he loved the history of Mercedes, not billboard racing. Whether you think that's stubborn or principled, probably predicts how you feel about the whole arc. There's also the cost of the Thruxton shunt, a reality often sanitised. Weaver remembers a difference before and after. The pre-accident Mike, who could just look at a corner and know the quickest way round, and the post-accident version, who needed to build more reference points, like the rest of us mere mortals. But even then, he was still brilliant enough to win championships and blue ribbon races. Here's the part that flips the script. After the 86-88 seasons, with more years left on the clock than behind him, Thackwell started to let it go. He dabbled some more Formula 3000 races, more sports car races, and even a Le Mans run, but there's no scramble to hang on to being a driver at any cost. He walked away in his late 20s, worked as a helicopter pilot, a gold miner, a teacher, lived a life. He re-entered the paddock only occasionally, when it suited him, not the other way around. In a sport that can keep people long after the fun goes, that's a form of victory most don't recognise until it's too late. And if you're wondering whether the respect dried up when the headlines did, listen to the people who were there. Weaver's line we quoted earlier, an absolute genius, doesn't come with an asterisk, and Touranak's "could have gone a lot further" isn't a throwaway line. These aren't fan posters, they're sober judgments of peers who had seen the spectrum of the journeyman to generational. If you prefer the story told in a single sentence, here it is. Mike Thackwell is what happens when a rare, rounded talent meets a sport that, at that moment, wanted something different, and a person who would rather stay true to himself than bend into shape. There's a last piece of context worth adding, because we live in an era where teenage debuts are normalised by Max Verstappen and company. In the late 1970s and early 80s, a teenager pitching up in F1 wasn't a marketing plan, it was almost an oddity. Thackwell had the pace to belong, but he also had the self-possession to leave. If that sounds like wasting a gift, consider how many drivers we've seen hang on for far too long and fade on the screen. There's a dignity to fade to black if you choose. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode of the Racing Chronicles. We've got plenty more stories coming your way, so please stay tuned for the next chapter in racing history. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.